You read about the blind seeing or the sick being just completely healed, the dead being raised to life. And it is, it's wonderful. It's deeply comforting to read those stories. But then you close the Bible.
Right. You close it and return to your own reality.
Exactly. You look up and you look around at your own living room, your own totally unresolved struggles. And this very quiet, very painful question just sort of rises up. You find yourself asking, God, what about me? Why am I still in this exact same place? Welcome to this deep dive reflection titled From This Week's Sermon by Our Pastor.
It is such a heavy, honest question, and it's exactly where our pastor met us this week, I think, because we have all been in that living room, praying for a child who's still struggling, or praying for physical healing that just hasn't come.
Yeah, or watching a marriage drift further and further apart despite all of those really desperate prayers. It's so hard.
It really is. When you have prayed all the way to the absolute end of your strength, and the reality that is just sitting right in front of you still doesn't match the prayer you've been praying, what is our faith actually supposed to hold on to?
That is the core of what we really need to explore today. We are going to thoroughly sit with what true faith actually looks like when our reality simply does not match our prayers.
Yeah.
Because it's uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. It's profoundly uncomfortable.
Right. So we'll be looking really deeply at those intertwining stories of Jairus and the bleeding woman from Mark chapter 5. And we'll look at that alongside some of those harder, more profound insights from Hebrews 11 and Daniel 3 that the pastor brought up.
Yeah, that connection he made was just brilliant.
It really was. So our hope for this deep dive is to uncover some moments of realization about God's timeline and to find some really practical ways to carry one another's burdens as a church family, especially when that waiting period just feels completely unbearable.
Well, and to understand why we feel so abandoned when our prayers aren't answered on our own schedule, we first have to look closely at the unique way the Gospel of Mark is actually written.
Yes, the pacing. It's so fast.
Exactly. Mark is always in a hurry. But as the pastor shared with us, Mark does something fascinating with the pacing of this specific story in chapter 5. He shows us this violent collision of two very different timelines. So we start with Jairus.
Right, Jairus, who is a pretty big deal in the community.
He is. He's a synagogue leader, so he's a man of high status, of public dignity. He's the person people look up to for answers. But in this moment of sheer terror, he just casts all of that dignity aside.
Because his daughter is dying.
Right. He falls face down in the dirt at Jesus' feet. His 12-year-old daughter is actively dying. And the pastor pointed out that the original language Mark uses there for save her is incredibly intense.
Oh, I remember this. It's not just a polite request.
No, not at all. It means to physically rescue, like to violently pull from the brink of death, to make entirely whole. He desperately wants his little girl to live. And when Jesus agrees to go with him, Jairus must have felt this overwhelming, dizzying surge of relief, like, we are going to make it.
Oh, the relief must have been physical. But the clock is ticking so loudly in that moment. They're on their way, and you just know every single step matters. But then that urgent timeline gets interrupted.
Right, the interruption.
Jesus suddenly stops because a woman in the crushing crowd touches his cloak. And as the pastor emphasized, this isn't just a brief over-the-shoulder pause, like, oh, hey, who touched me? Jesus stops the entire procession.
He hits the brakes on everything.
He really does. He stops everything to look for her, and then he stays there to actually listen to her entire story. And it's a story of 12 years of agonizing, isolating suffering from this bleeding condition.
And that repetition of the number 12, it is staggering when you actually stop and weigh it. I mean, for 12 years, this woman's life had been a slow, humiliating decline. Because of her condition, she was ceremonially unclean.
Right. She couldn't even participate in normal society.
Exactly. She couldn't go to worship. She couldn't hug her family. She was a complete outcast. Meanwhile, for those exact same 12 years, Jairus' daughter had been growing, thriving, being celebrated by her family, only to now be standing at the door of death.
It's a sharp contrast.
It is. Biblical scholars often call this a sandwich structure, placing one story entirely inside another. But as the pastor noted, it's far more than just a neat literary trick. It forces us to see these two lives, the revered VIP and the untouchable outcast reflecting one another.
Yeah, that really stuck with me.
And in that excruciating pause, Jesus doesn't just physically heal the woman and send her quickly on her way. He looks at her, a woman who for 12 years was likely only known by her illness. She was probably whispered about as the bleeding woman by everyone in town. And he calls her daughter.
Wow. He gives her identity back.
He completely restores her humanity. She was no longer defined by her 12-year trauma.
It is just, it is a beautiful, deeply moving moment for her.
Yeah.
It really is. But if I'm being completely honest here, I keep putting myself in Jairus' shoes. I just keep feeling his sheer panic.
Oh, I totally agree. You can't help it.
Right. It's like, imagine being in the back of an ambulance with a dying loved one. The sirens are blaring, the lights are flashing. You know, every single second counts. And suddenly the driver just pulls over to the side of the road to help someone change a flat tire.
Yes. You would lose your mind.
I would be screaming. I'd be pounding on the glass saying, there is no time for this. We have a literal life or death emergency in here. So how are we supposed to reconcile this apparent unfairness in our own lives? You know, when we see God actively pausing to grant someone else's miracle while our own crisis just keeps getting worse.
That is the agonizing reality of the wait. It is so deeply human to feel that frustration, and it forces us to confront what actually happens when the delay turns into our absolute worst fear.
Because it does happen.
It does. As we saw in the pastor's message, while Jesus was stopped, while he was tenderly listening to the woman's story, Jairus' daughter died. People came from his house and literally told him, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?"
Oh, that phrase. Why bother the teacher anymore? It's just devastating.
It is perhaps the hardest realization we will ever face in our faith. The worst case scenario actually happened. And it happened while God was seemingly distracted by someone else's problem.
And in that moment of total devastation, Jesus turns to Jairus, who had literally just had his entire world shatter into a million pieces right there in the street. And Jesus says, "Do not be afraid, just believe."
Yeah.
Which, on the surface, honestly, it sounds almost cruel. It sounds impossible to ask of a grieving father.
It does sound tone deaf if you don't understand what he's actually asking. But as the pastor explained, Jesus wasn't saying, believe that I'm going to give you the exact outcome you want right this second. He was saying, do not let fear make you let go of me.
Just hold on to me.
Right. Jairus still doesn't know what Jesus is going to do. He doesn't know there's a resurrection coming in the next hour. He is just standing there in the ruins of his life.
That is such a huge turning point, because this is where we have to fundamentally redefine faith beyond our desired outcomes. And the pastor drew such a sobering contrast between this miraculous story in Mark 5 and the harsh reality we see in Hebrews 11.
Yes, Hebrews 11. We love to talk about Hebrews 11.
We do. It's the Hall of Faith. It lists all these great heroes, people who parted seas, shut the mouths of lions, conquered kingdoms. We love the victorious stuff. But the writer of Hebrews also openly admits in the very same chapter that many faithful people were mocked, they were beaten, and they died without ever receiving what was promised to them.
They died without receiving the promise. It is a deeply uncomfortable truth.
It really is. That goes against almost everything we prefer to talk about on a Sunday morning. We want the victory. We want the clean ending.
We absolutely do. It forces us out of our comfort zones. But it's the truth of Scripture. And it brings us to that ultimate picture of faith we see in Daniel 3, with the three friends facing the fiery furnace.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Exactly. They look the king dead in the eye and say, God is able to deliver us. But even if he does not, we will not serve your gods, even if he does not.
Even if he does not. That is so powerful.
It changes everything about how we pray. Prayer, at its very core, is an act of surrendering and entrusting ourselves to God. It is not, it's not a technique we use to manipulate him into staying within the boundaries of what we think is best.
Right, but how do we actually live that out? Because I know my immediate reflex, and I think it's a pretty common human reflex, is to blame myself when the healing doesn't happen.
No, for sure. We look inward immediately.
We do. We sit there in the hospital waiting room and think, well, I must not have prayed hard enough. I didn't have enough faith. If I just believed more without doubting, my child would be better. We are so conditioned to treat faith like a spiritual vending machine.
A vending machine, exactly.
We think that if we just insert the right amount of belief or the right Bible verses, we are absolutely guaranteed the exact product we selected. How do we stop doing that to ourselves?
Well, that vending machine mentality is incredibly toxic. And it's exactly what we have to dismantle. Because when the result doesn't drop down the chute like we expect, we are left feeling like our faith was somehow defective. Or worse, we conclude that God has just completely failed us.
Which leads to so much bitterness.
It does. But if we can accept that true biblical faith includes those agonizing, even if he does not, moments, it completely changes everything. And importantly, it especially changes how we are called to interact with each other in our own church community.
Yes, when someone sitting in the pew next to us is quietly suffering. This part of the message really, really struck a nerve with me.
Me too.
When someone we love is in pain, there is this immense, almost overwhelming temptation to try and explain away their suffering. Like we want to give it a neat little bow so we don't have to feel the discomfort of it.
It's exactly what Job's friends did.
Exactly. They couldn't handle the tension of his unexplainable tragedy, so they just sat around inventing theological reasons for why he was suffering. And God ultimately rebuked them for it.
He was angry with them. We have to be so incredibly careful with each other's pain. We must never casually pat someone on the back and say, well, God is doing this for a reason. Or tell someone who has been battling a chronic illness for 10 years to just declare it by faith and claim your healing.
So dismissive.
It is terribly dismissive. We do not know the hidden will of God that easily. The pastor pointed us to Galatians 6, verse 2, which gives us a very different command. It simply says, carry each other's burdens.
Carry them.
Notice it doesn't say fix each other's problems or explain each other's tragedies. It says to carry the weight. Our church cannot just be a highlight reel of answered prayers and miraculous testimonies.
As much as we love hearing them.
Right, we love them, but we desperately need to create a safe space for people to walk through the doors and say, I am profoundly disappointed with God right now, and for the rest of us to simply stay beside them without flinching.
That makes me think of how often I act like a spiritual mechanic.
A spiritual mechanic? What do you mean?
Well, when a friend comes to me in deep grief, my absolute first instinct is to pop the hood. I want to get my tools out. I want to tighten a few loose screws with some Christian cliches, quote a really reassuring Bible verse, and just fix the engine of their pain.
Yeah. Because their pain makes us feel helpless.
Right. Because their pain makes me deeply uncomfortable. But what the pastor is asking us to do is to put down the tools. Stop trying to fix the unfixable. Just open the passenger side door, get in the seat, and sit in the dark with them. That is so much harder to do.
It is infinitely harder. Because it requires us to sit in the mystery of suffering without an easy answer. We like answers. But sometimes simply being present with someone in the dark is a far greater expression of Christ's love than trying to hand them a flashlight.
That is so true. Just being there.
Now, of course, as the pastor reminded us, the story in Mark 5 doesn't end in the dark.
Thank goodness.
Right. There is a miracle. Jesus does go to Jairus' house. He walks into the room, takes the dead little girl by the hand, and says, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up.
Just a beautiful moment.
He proves right there in front of everyone weeping that death is not the final authority. It is this breathtaking preview of Romans 8, the promise that absolutely nothing, not even death itself, can separate us from the love of God.
It is a staggering moment of power.
Yeah.
But then, right after this incredible, earth-shattering display of divine authority, Jesus says something so wonderfully ordinary.
Yeah, this really caught me off guard.
Right. He raises her from the dead, and then he looks at her stunned parents and says, give her somebody to eat.
Give her something to eat. It is such a profound pivot straight back to reality, because Jairus' daughter, even though she was miraculously raised that day, eventually grew old, and she died again later in life.
Yeah, that's something we usually forget to mention.
We do. The miracle didn't make her immortal. Both devastating grief and staggering miracles eventually give way to the exact same thing, which is Tuesday morning.
Tuesday morning. Wow.
After the miracle, or, after an incredible spiritually uplifting Sunday worship service, you still have to wake up. You still have to pay the rent. You have to go to work. You have to sit in the waiting room at the dentist or the doctor's office.
The laundry still have to go.
Exactly. Faith is not an escape hatch from our reality. As the pastor shared with us, faith is living with God in the midst of that ordinary, often difficult reality. And that's true regardless of whether the massive problem in your life has been solved or not.
I wrestle with that, though. I really do.
How so?
Because if she still has to eat breakfast today, and if she's eventually going to face the grave again anyway, what was the ultimate point of the miracle in the first place? I mean, is it simply a temporary glimpse of the resurrection? Just a burst of light to fuel our endurance for all those mundane, heavy Tuesday mornings?
Well, I believe it is exactly that glimpse. It is a signpost. It tells us that death and chronic pain and the silence of God do not have the final word in the story of the universe.
A signpost pointing to what's coming.
Yes. The miracle shows us exactly who God is, but the command to give her something to eat grounds us in where we currently live.
Yeah.
He is the God who commands the dead to rise, but he is also the God who sits with us at the kitchen table on a random Tuesday when our hearts are still heavy and the bills are overdue.
He's the God both moments.
Exactly. And that is why our prayers have to shift. We should absolutely pray boldly for healing.
Yeah.
We should cry out for our children. We should ask for the massive breakthrough. But as the pastor so movingly called us to do, we have to anchor our souls to that ultimate confession.
The Daniel 3 confession.
Right. God, even if you do not do it the way I want or in the time I want, please keep me from letting go of you.
Even if you do not, I will not let go. That is everything. And as we bring this deep dive reflection to a close, let's just remember that our ultimate hope is not a life completely free of problems. Our hope is Jesus Christ, who is infinitely greater than our problems.
That's right. Today's tears and today's silence, they are not the final word.
They aren't. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week, just building on what we've talked about today. Think back to that bleeding woman in the crushing crowd.
The interruption.
Yes, the interruption. Jesus stopped for her right in the middle of a literal life or death emergency for someone else. In our own lives, we so often view delays and waiting periods as God being distracted or God being late. But what if God's interruptions are actually his primary appointments?
Oh, that's a beautiful way to look at it.
What if the frustrating, agonizing waiting period you're sitting in right now is the exact space where God is doing his most important identity-restoring work in you? What if the really long pause is exactly where he is preparing to look at you, completely whole, and call you daughter or son?
That completely changes how you view the waiting.
It really does. It reframes the whole thing. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. To you, our fellow church family member, we wish you a deeply blessed week as you walk the road given to you today. Keep praying, keep believing, and even if he does not, don't let go. Take care.